We are in the heart of Germany, at a 7,000-year-old Neolithic grave site, 1,000 miles from the nearest sea. The skeleton belongs to a high-status woman, a chieftainess or a shaman, buried with the symbols of her power. Among the simple beads of bone and polished stone, there is something else, something alien. A series of large, magnificent, polished discs and bracelets. Their surfaces are beautiful, almost living, swirl of cream and deep crimson. They are the shells of Spondylus gideropus, the thorny oyster, and their natural home is not the cold rivers of Europe, but the warm, deep waters of the distant Aegean Sea. How did this crimson gold make an impossible journey across a roadless, unmapped continent to be buried with a Stone Age matriarch? This is the story of Europe's first great luxury trade, and the mystery of how the desire for a single, beautiful shell forged a new world. To understand this story, we must travel back to the dawn of a new Europe, around 6000 BC. The last vestiges of the Ice Age are gone, and a revolutionary new technology, agriculture, is spreading across the continent. This is a world of small, isolated, and largely self-sufficient farming villages, a patchwork of disparate cultures, their worlds often ending at the edge of the forest. Into this fragmented landscape, a strange and exotic new commodity appears, an object with no practical utility, but one that held an immense and powerful allure. It was an object of pure, symbolic value. This documentary will investigate the Great Spondylus trade as Europe's first internet, the continent's first great, long-distance network that physically and culturally connected the warm, maritime south with the dark, forested heartland of the north. We will argue that this was the very first chapter in the long history of the European economy, a system born not from a need for tools or food, but from the fundamental human desire for beauty, for status, and for the exotic. Our investigation will follow the trail of this crimson gold from its source to its final resting place. We will ask, why this particular shell? What made it the foundational status symbol of a continent? We will journey to the shores of the Aegean to uncover the secrets of its perilous harvest and the story of the world's first and most daring specialist divers. We will chart the prehistoric highways, the great river valleys, along which this precious commodity was traded, its value increasing exponentially with every mile it traveled north. Most importantly, we will reveal how this very first European ancient trade network acted as a powerful engine of social change. We will show how the control of this trade created the very concepts of personal wealth and elite power, giving rise to the first big men and chieftains of old Europe. This is not just the story of a seashell. It is the story of the birth of the European economy, the creation of the first trade routes that would one day become the arteries of a continent, and the tale of how the simple human love for a beautiful object was a force powerful enough to forge a new world. In the quiet, earthy world of Neolithic Europe, a world of wood, stone, and bone, the arrival of a Spondylus shell must have been an event of pure, breathtaking magic. To understand the immense power of this object, we must first unlearn our modern notions of value. This was an economy not of gold, but of meaning. The Spondylus shell had no practical use. It could not fell a tree, till the soil, or kill a boar. Its value was entirely symbolic, a potent and complex cocktail of beauty, rarity, and a deep, mythological connection to a world that most of its owners had never seen. This was Europe's first jewel, and the desire it inspired was the spark that would ignite the continent's first great network of ancient trade. The source of this desire was the object itself. Spondylus gideropus, the thorny oyster, is a bivalve mollusk, but it is unlike the humble clams and mussels of the riverbed. It is a creature of substance and character. The shell is large, heavy, and robust, with a distinctive ball-and socket hinge that gives it a sense of permanence and strength. But its most striking feature is its color. The exterior is often a creamy porcelain white, but it is frequently flushed with a magnificent, deep, reddish pink or orange-crimson hue. This was not the dull brown of the forest floor or the simple gray of flint. This was a vibrant, living color, a splash of the exotic that would have been utterly alien and captivating to the inland farmer. This powerful visual appeal was magnified by its profound exoticism. For the inhabitants of the linear pottery culture in Germany or the Vinca culture in the Balkans, their world was the forest, the river valley, and the plain. The sea was a distant, abstract concept, a mythical place at the world's edge. The Spondylus shell was a physical fragment of that mythical world. It was a tangible piece of the unknown, an object that had completed an immense and mysterious journey. To hold, it was to hold a connection to the very source of life, to the great, powerful waters that lay beyond the horizon. Its spines, often worn down or polished off, would have only added to its mystique, a hint of a strange and perhaps dangerous creature from a supernatural realm. Its immense value was, in part, the value of the journey itself, a concept at the very heart of the prestige goods economy. The color crimson was, in itself, a source of immense power. Across countless human cultures, red is the color of life and death, of blood and fertility, of passion and danger. It is a color that demands attention, a color that speaks of power. In a world of muted earth tones, an individual adorned with a large, polished, crimson spondylus ornament would have been instantly set apart. It was a beacon of status, a declaration of importance that required no language to understand. The shell's natural coloration tapped into a deep and pre-existing symbolic vocabulary, making it the perfect, universal signifier of elite status. Archaeologists and anthropologists also point to another, perhaps even more powerful, layer of symbolism. Fertility. The distinctive shape of the shell, with its curved form and reddish, lip-like opening, has been widely interpreted as a powerful symbol of female sexuality and fecundity. This is reinforced by the archaeological context in which it is often found. Many of the most lavish spondylus burials are those of women, their bodies adorned with belts, bracelets, and headdresses made from the precious material. In a society of early farmers, for whom the fertility of their crops, their livestock, and their own people was the single most important determinant of survival, an object so powerfully linked to the concept of life-giving power would have been a sacred and invaluable talisman. It was likely a key component in the ritual life of the community, an object used by shamans and priestesses to ensure the continuation of the cycle of life. But the value was not just in the raw shell. The true genius of the Neolithic craftsmen was in their ability to transform this natural object into a cultural one. The raw shells were almost never used in their natural state. They were the raw material for a sophisticated craft industry. The spines would be painstakingly ground off. The shells would be cut into standardized forms, discs, rings, and complex belt-like pieces. And most importantly, they would be polished for hundreds of hours, using sand and water until their surfaces shone with a deep, lustrous, porcelain-like sheen. This process required immense skill and time, a significant investment of labor that further increased the object's value. The finished ornament was not just a found object. It was a manufactured luxury good, a product of a specialized technological process. This transformation from raw shell to polished jewel was the first value add in the European luxury economy, a process that turned a gift from the sea into a currency of power, ready to be traded on the continent's first great highway of desire. The desire for crimson gold was a continent-wide phenomenon, but its supply was a matter of strict and unforgiving geography. The Spondylus gideropus is a creature of very specific tastes. It is a thermophilic, or warm-loving, species. It thrives only in the warmer, saltier waters of the Mediterranean and the adjacent Black Sea. It cannot survive in the cold, brackish waters of the Baltic, nor in the frigid North Sea. This simple biological fact created a powerful and unalterable natural monopoly. The entire supply of this immensely valuable commodity for all of Neolithic Europe originated in a single, well-defined geographical cradle. The Aegean and Black Sea coastlines. The communities that lived on these shores were the sole gatekeepers of the continent's first great luxury resource. The journey to pinpoint this source has been a long and intricate piece of archaeological and biological detective work. By studying the modern distribution of the species, marine biologists have been able to map the precise environmental conditions it needs to flourish. The waters must be warm, with a high degree of salinity, and there must be a rocky substrate for the oyster to affix itself to, typically at depths of 10 to 50 meters. These conditions are met perfectly along the coasts of modern-day Greece, Bulgaria, and the shores of the Aegean Sea. When archaeologists then plot the distribution of early Neolithic sites that show evidence of Spondylus working, the map aligns with the biology perfectly. The earliest and most intensive evidence for the exploitation of this resource is found in the very regions where the snail is most abundant. One of the most important of these early centers is the site of Domini in northern Greece. Here, dating back to nearly 5000 BC, archaeologists have unearthed not just the finished, polished ornaments, but the entire toolkit and the industrial waste of a massive Spondylus workshop. They have found piles of raw, unworked shells, half-finished pieces that broke during production, and the simple but effective flint tools, drills, scrapers, and polishers used to work the hard shell material. This is the archaeological fingerprint of a specialized industry. The people of Domini were not just occasionally finding and using these shells. They were systematically harvesting and processing them on a scale far beyond their own local needs. They were, in essence, one of the first great manufacturing and export centers of the prehistoric European economy. The same pattern is seen at other coastal sites, most spectacularly along the western coast of the Black Sea, in what is now modern Bulgaria. Here at sites like the Durinculac Cemetery, we see the beginnings of the great cultural and economic explosion that would culminate at Varna. The coastal communities here had direct access to the rich Spondylus beds of the Black Sea. And it is in their grave that we see the first signs of the immense value being placed on this commodity. While their inland neighbors were living a simpler, more egalitarian existence, the leaders of these coastal communities were being buried with an astonishing concentration of Spondylus jewelry. This evidence allows us to reconstruct the first stage of the ancient trade. The coastal peoples were the primary producers. They possessed the geographic advantage, direct access to the resource, and they developed the specialized knowledge required to harvest it, which we will explore in the next chapter. They were the first link in a long and complex supply chain. They would have processed the raw shells into finished or semi-finished ornaments, which were already objects of immense value. These finished goods would then have been traded to their immediate inland neighbors, perhaps at seasonal gatherings or established trading places. For what? The coastal communities, while rich in this one exotic resource, may have been poor in others. They would have traded their crimson gold for the things they needed from the interior. High-quality flint for their tools from inland quarries, fine pottery from other cultural groups, agricultural surpluses, or perhaps even livestock. This was the beginning of a regional economy of specialization. The coastal communities specialized in the production of a high-value luxury good, while the inland communities specialized in the production of utilitarian goods and foodstuffs. This initial exchange was the spark that lit the fuse of the great transcontinental network. The first inland group that received the Spondylus ornaments would keep some for their own elite, but would then trade the surplus on to the next group further inland, and so on and so on. The Aegean and Black Sea coasts were the cradle, the source point from which the entire network radiated. The people who lived here were the founders of Europe's first great luxury trade, the original gatekeepers who controlled the continent's supply of crimson gold. The coastal communities of the Aegean had access to the source of Europe's crimson gold, but this treasure was not a gift that the sea simply washed ashore. Unlike amber, which could be collected from the beach after a storm, the Spondylus gideropus lives its adult life firmly cemented to the rocky seabed, often at considerable depths. To acquire this shell in the quantities needed for a continent-spanning trade network required a terrifying and perilous act, a journey into the alien underwater world. The harvesting of Spondylus was not a casual act of beachcombing. It was a dangerous and highly specialized profession, an enterprise that likely gave rise to the world's first true class of high-risk specialists, the Neolithic freediver. The immense value of the shell was, in large part, a direct reflection of the immense danger of its acquisition. The Spondylus oyster thrives in the calmer waters below the violent surge of the surf zone, typically at depths ranging from 10 to as deep as 50 meters, or 165 feet. For a Neolithic human, equipped with no breathing apparatus, no fins, and no wetsuit, a journey to these depths was a journey to the absolute limits of human endurance. We must imagine the scene. The diver would have been a man or woman of incredible physical fitness and lung capacity, their body honed by a lifetime of this specific, demanding work. They would have paddled out from the shore in a simple dugout canoe, their only equipment a heavy stone weight to speed their descent, a net or basket to hold their prize, and perhaps a bone or horn tool to pry the stubborn shells from the rocks. The descent itself would have been a plunge into a world of crushing pressure and growing darkness. Holding their breath, they would have used the stone weight to pull them down, fighting against their own natural buoyancy. At a depth of 30 meters or nearly 100 feet, the pressure would be 4 times that of the surface, squeezing their chest, their sinuses, and their inner ears. The pain would have been immense. They would have had only a minute, perhaps 90 seconds at the absolute most, to work. In the dim, blue underwater light, they would have had to locate their spiny prey, use their tool to forcefully break its powerful natural cement from the rock, and place it in their basket before their screaming lungs forced them to drop everything and make a desperate ascent to the surface. This was a profession where the risks were catastrophic and omnipresent. The most obvious danger was drowning, a fate that would have claimed many. But the divers also faced the insidious and poorly understood dangers of the deep. Barotrauma, the damage to the body's air spaces caused by the immense pressure, would have been a constant problem, leading to ruptured eardrums and agonizing sinus pain. Even more mysterious and deadly would have been the effects of what we now know as decompression sickness, or the bends. A diver ascending too quickly from a deep or repetitive dive could suffer agonizing joint pain, paralysis, or even death, as the nitrogen that had dissolved into their tissues under pressure violently formed bubbles in their bloodstream. The archaeological record provides grim, silent testimony to these dangers. Skeletal remains of individuals from these coastal Neolithic communities often show a specific and telling pathology. Auditory exostosis, the growth of abnormal bony lumps in the ear canal. This condition is a well-known response of the human body to repeated long-term exposure to cold water and pressure changes. It is, in the modern world, commonly known as surfer's ear or diver's ear. To find this condition in the skeletons of Neolithic people from these specific coastal sites is the smoking gun, the undeniable proof that they were, in fact, professional, habitual divers, their very bones reshaped by the rigors of their unique and perilous occupation. The existence of such a high-risk profession implies, once again, a high degree of economic specialization. These divers were not ordinary farmers or fishermen. They were elite specialists, the astronauts of their day, venturing into an alien environment to retrieve an object of immense value. Their unique and dangerous skill would have set them apart. They were the essential first link in the entire ancient trade network, the only people capable of acquiring the raw material. This would have afforded them a high status in their communities, but their work would have also been controlled and organized. It is likely that these divers operated under the patronage of a powerful chieftain or a village elder who would have financed their expeditions and managed the subsequent trade of the shells they brought back. The sheer quantity of Spondylus found across Europe, from grave containing hundreds of beads, tells us that this was not a rare or occasional activity. It was an industry. It would have required a large and dedicated workforce of these specialist divers, making hundreds, even thousands of perilous descents, season after season, to satisfy the immense demand. Each and every polished, crimson bead found in a grave 1,000 miles away in the heart of Germany is a silent monument to one of these forgotten heroes. Its immense value was not just in its color or its shape, but in the human courage and the lungful of air that was risked to bring it up from the darkness of the deep. The perilous work of the divers had brought the crimson gold from the depths of the sea to the coastal workshops of the Aegean and Black Sea. But for this precious commodity to forge a continent, it had to travel. It had to move from the hands of the coastal producers into the heart of old Europe. A journey of over 1,000 miles, across a landscape without a single road, a world of dense, primeval forests, treacherous swamps, and the territories of countless unknown tribes. The solution to this immense logistical challenge was a network of natural, pre-existing superhighways, the great rivers of Europe. The Danube, the Rhine, the Elbe, these mighty arteries of water became the conduits for the first great continental trade, the pathways along which the Spondylus shell would travel, its value growing with every mile in a complex, step-by-step system of exchange. The primary model for this trade was not one of long-distance, epic expeditions like those of the later tin traders. Instead, the Spondylus trade appears to have been a classic down-the-line network. This was not a system of a single merchant carrying a single cargo from source to destination. It was a chain of many individual transactions. A coastal group would trade a surplus of their shells to their immediate inland neighbors. This first inland group would keep the best pieces for their own elites and then trade the rest on to the next village further up the river valley. This next village would do the same, and so on, in a long, cascading chain of exchanges that passed the valuable commodity from hand to hand, from village to village, deep into the heart of the continent. This system had a profound economic effect. With every step in the chain, the value of the Spondylus would have increased exponentially. An ornament that was relatively common and accessible in a coastal village in Greece would become an object of almost unimaginable rarity and prestige by the time it reached a farming community in the Paris basin. Its value was a direct function of the social and geographical distance it had traveled. This increasing value was the very engine that kept the trade moving. Each group in the chain had a powerful economic incentive to acquire more shells than they needed for their own use. As the surplus was a valuable commodity, they could trade for other essential goods: high-quality flint, stone axes, livestock, or even social alliances. The desire for this single, exotic object was, in effect, teaching the disparate, isolated peoples of Neolithic Europe the very language and logic of the economy. The Great Danube River was the central superhighway of this entire network. Rising in the Black Forest of Germany and flowing for nearly 2,000 miles to the Black Sea, the Danube was the great artery that connected Eastern and Central Europe. Communities living along its banks were perfectly positioned to become the key middlemen in this trade. A village on the lower Danube, near the Black Sea coast, could acquire the shells directly from the producing cultures. They would then use their simple dugout canoes to transport the goods upstream, trading them with villages in modern-day Serbia and Hungary. These villages, in turn, would trade them further upriver, eventually connecting to other river systems like the Rhine, which would carry the shells into Germany and France. The Danube was the spine of a continental trade network. its tributaries the branching nerves that carried this precious cargo to the furthest reaches of the continent. The archaeological evidence for these riverine routes is clear and undeniable. When archaeologists plot the find sites of Spondylus artifacts on a map, they do not appear randomly. They form distinct, linear patterns that align with astonishing precision to the major river valleys of Europe. The densest concentrations are found along the Danube and its tributaries. This is not a coincidence. It is the physical, archaeological footprint of the great prehistoric highways. The rivers were the pathways of least resistance, the natural conduits for the flow of people, ideas, and, above all, valuable goods. This down-the-line system was more than just an economic network. It was a social one. The exchange of these high-status shells was likely not a simple marketplace transaction. It was probably embedded in complex social rituals. The exchange of gifts between chieftains to forge an alliance, the payment of a bride price to seal a marriage, or a centerpiece of great, seasonal, intertribal gatherings. The shells were the physical tokens that bound these disparate societies together, creating a shared system of value, a shared understanding of prestige, and a shared, interconnected cultural world for the first time. The great rivers, for so long barriers that divided the landscape, were being transformed by the logic of trade into the very arteries that gave birth to a connected Europe. The Spondylus trade did more than just connect the disparate peoples of Neolithic Europe. It fundamentally and irrevocably transformed their societies. For millennia, the world of the first European farmers had been a largely egalitarian one. While individuals may have been respected for their age or their skill, the archaeological evidence points to a world with little in the way of significant, heritable wealth or institutionalized power. But the arrival of this new, exotic, and immensely valuable commodity acted as a powerful catalyst for social change. The desire for crimson gold, and more importantly, the control over its trade, created a new form of wealth, a new form of power, and a new kind of person. The big man, the proto-chieftain, the ancestor of the entire European elite. The story of the Spondylus trade is the story of the birth of social inequality. The most powerful and intimate evidence for this social revolution comes from the cemeteries of Neolithic Europe, particularly those of the linear pottery culture, or LBK, the first great farming society of the continent's interior. In the early phases of this culture, the burials are remarkably uniform. Individuals are buried with simple grave goods, a pot, a stone axe, with little to distinguish one from another. But in the later phases, as the Spondylus trade reaches its peak, a dramatic new pattern emerges. A few select graves suddenly become astonishingly rich, and the primary marker of this new elite status is Spondylus. We find the grave of certain powerful men, buried not just with their weapons, but with magnificent belts, bracelets, and chest ornaments made from dozens, sometimes hundreds, of polished Spondylus beads and discs. This was a breathtaking and public display of wealth and power. An individual adorned with this much of the precious, imported material was making a clear and unambiguous statement to his community. He was a man of immense importance, a man with the power and the long-distance connections needed to acquire the most valuable commodity of his age. This was not just jewelry. It was a political uniform, a declaration that he was a leader, a big man who stood above the common farmer. Even more startling is the discovery of equally rich burials of women and children. At sites like the Vedrovice Cemetery in the Czech Republic, archaeologists have unearthed the grave of women adorned with elaborate Spondylus headdresses and belts, their status in death clearly equal to or even greater than that of the men. And the grave of some children are found to contain these precious shells, objects they could not possibly have earned or acquired through their own actions. This is the crucial, smoking gun evidence for the birth of hereditary status. It means that wealth and power were no longer just a matter of personal achievement. They could now be inherited. The child of a powerful trading lineage was born into a life of privilege, a concept that was utterly revolutionary in this once egalitarian world. The economy of prestige goods had created the very concept of the dynasty. How did this system work? The big man was a new kind of leader whose power was based on his ability to control the flow of exotic, high-status goods. By positioning himself as the primary middleman for the Spondylus trade in his region, he could accumulate a level of personal wealth that was previously unimaginable. But this wealth was not just for hoarding. It was a tool for creating a network of social and political obligation. The big man would use his treasury of crimson gold to engage in strategic acts of gift-giving. He would award a fine Spondylus bracelet to his most loyal warrior. He would pay the bride price for his son's marriage with a magnificent belt of the precious shells, forging an alliance with a neighboring village. Each gift was a transaction, an investment that created a social debt. The recipients of his generosity were now bound to him by a powerful sense of obligation. They owed him their loyalty, their support in times of conflict, and their labor for community projects. The once independent farmers were slowly being transformed into the clients and followers of a powerful patron. The entire social structure was being reforged, from a horizontal network of equals into a new vertical pyramid of power, with the big man at its apex. This was the birth of patronage, the fundamental political economy that would define European society for the next 7,000 years. The beautiful, sacred shell, once a symbol of fertility, had now become the currency of power, the tool that was used to carve out the first lines of social and political inequality on the face of old Europe. The Spondylus trade was creating a new social order across the continent, a world of emerging elites whose power was displayed in the crimson jewels they wore. But to see the ultimate expression of this new economy, to witness the staggering heights of wealth and power that could be achieved by controlling this prehistoric supply chain, we must travel to a single, extraordinary site on the coast of the Black Sea. This is the Varna necropolis in modern-day Bulgaria. Unearthed by accident in 1972, this 6,500-year-old cemetery is not just another rich Neolithic site. It is home to the oldest major assemblage of gold artifacts ever discovered in the world. But the story of Varna's gold cannot be understood without the story of its Spondylus. Varna was a community that sat at the very source of the crimson gold, and the evidence is overwhelming that they transformed their control of this precious shell trade into an economic engine that would allow them to become the masters of the world's first true gold. The Varna culture was perfectly positioned. They lived directly on the shores of the Black Sea, with immediate access to the rich, local beds of Spondylus shells. They were one of the primary producers, the original gatekeepers, at the very beginning of the great transcontinental trade network. The sheer quantity of Spondylus found in their grave is breathtaking, far exceeding that of the inland cultures who had to import it at great cost. We see belts, necklaces, and bracelets of immense size and complexity. But the people of Varna were not just wearing their wealth, they were trading it. They were the primary suppliers for the Danube Highway, the great riverine route that carried the shells deep into the heart of Europe. This privileged position as the primary exporters of Europe's most desired luxury good generated an immense and unprecedented influx of wealth. And the people of Varna used this wealth to acquire and master the next great technological and status-defining material, gold. While the inland cultures were trading their agricultural surplus for Spondylus shells, the people of Varna were trading their Spondylus shells for raw gold, likely sourced from the nearby Carpathian Mountains. They then used this gold to create a spectacular and entirely new form of elite display. The treasures unearthed from the Varna grave are a testament to this economic explosion. In one grave alone, grave 43, archaeologists found the burial of a powerful chieftain or priest king. His body was adorned with nearly 1,000 separate gold objects, weighing a total of 15 kilograms. He wore massive, solid gold bracelets. His chest was covered in gold appliques that had been sewn onto his burial shroud. He held a magnificent scepter-like axe, its handle decorated with gold. And most strikingly, a golden penis sheath covered his groin, a potent symbol of virility and power. This was not just jewelry, it was a complete suit of pure, glittering gold, a display of wealth so far beyond anything seen before in the prehistoric world that it defies imagination. This was the richest man on Earth in 4500 BC. What is the connection to the Spondylus trade? The link is direct and undeniable. The very same elite grave that contain this world-changing hoard of gold also contain the symbols of the trade that paid for it. Vast quantities of Spondylus shell ornaments. The chieftain in grave 43, for all his gold, was also buried with precious shell jewelry. This shows that the two materials were seen as complementary, perhaps even equivalent, forms of high-status wealth. But more importantly, it strongly suggests a causal link. The Varna culture was not built on a gold mine, it was built on a Spondylus mine. They were the masters of the crimson gold economy, and they leveraged that mastery to become the first great masters of the yellow gold economy. Varna, therefore, represents the zenith of the Spondylus phenomenon. It was a society that had transformed its geographical good fortune into a powerful, wealth-generating engine. They controlled the source of a high-demand commodity. They likely managed its production and the first stages of its export. And they used the immense profits to create a society of stunning sophistication and unprecedented social stratification. The Varna chieftains were not just big men, they were true kings, their power displayed in a glittering new medium that the world had never seen before. The story of Varna is a perfect microcosm of the power of ancient trade. It shows how the control of a single, desirable commodity can lead to an explosion of wealth, the adoption of new technologies, and the creation of a powerful and deeply hierarchical social order. The world's oldest gold treasure is, in the end, a direct consequence of the world's first great luxury shell trade. The crimson gold of the sea had been alchemically transformed into the yellow gold of the earth. The story of the Spondylus trade, a vast, continent-spanning network connecting the Aegean to Germany, is a grand and almost unbelievable narrative. For decades, it was a theory, a compelling explanation built upon the simple, visual evidence of finding seashells 1,000 miles from the sea. But in the world of modern archaeology, a compelling theory is not enough. We need proof. How can we be absolutely certain that a specific Spondylus bead found in a 7,000-year-old grave in the forests of central Germany did not come from some long-extinct fossil deposit or a now-vanished Black Sea colony, but that it actually began its life in the warm waters of the Aegean Sea? The answer lies not in the shape or the style of the artifact, but hidden deep within its very atomic structure. Modern science has given us a tool to read this hidden signature, a geochemical passport that allows us to trace the journey of these shells with stunning, irrefutable precision. The key to this scientific detective story is the element strontium. Strontium is a common element found in rocks, soil, and most importantly, in water. As rivers flow over different geological formations, they pick up a unique and specific signature of strontium isotopes. An isotope is a variant of a chemical element with a different number of neutrons in its nucleus. The ratio of two of these isotopes, strontium-87 and strontium-86, varies predictably from one geological region to another. The rivers flowing over the ancient, crystalline rocks of the Balkan Mountains will have a different strontium isotope ratio than the rivers flowing through the younger, volcanic soils of Italy. This means that every major body of water on Earth, every sea, every ocean, has its own unique, measurable strontium fingerprint. This is where the biology of the Spondylus shell becomes a perfect scientific tool. As the thorny oyster grows, it builds its hard, calcium carbonate shell by absorbing minerals directly from the seawater around it, including strontium. The strontium isotope ratio of the surrounding water becomes permanently locked into the atomic structure of the shell as it grows. It is a natural, unalterable record of the exact location where the creature lived and died. The shell's chemistry becomes a perfect, lifelong passport, stamped with the indelible signature of its home sea. This breakthrough allows archaeologists to perform a remarkable test. A scientist can take a tiny, almost microscopic, sample from a precious 7,000-year-old Spondylus artifact. Using a sophisticated machine called a mass spectrometer, they can vaporize this sample and precisely measure the ratio of strontium-87 to strontium-86 within it. They can then compare this artifact fingerprint to a detailed global database of the strontium fingerprints of the world's oceans and seas. The results of this analysis have been a stunning confirmation of the great ancient trade network. When a Spondylus bracelet from a Neolithic grave in the German region of Bavaria is tested, its strontium fingerprint does not match the cold, brackish waters of the nearby Baltic Sea. It does not match the North Sea. It does not match the Atlantic. It provides a perfect and unambiguous match for the warm, saline waters of the Aegean and the western Black Sea. The science is unequivocal. It proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that these shells undertook an immense, transcontinental journey from south to north. This technology allows for an even greater level of precision. Scientists can now differentiate between the strontium signatures of the Aegean and the Black Sea, allowing them to trace the output of the different production zones and to map the different branches of the trade route with a new level of detail. It allows us to confirm that the communities at places like Varna were not just consumers, but were major producers, their shells having the distinct signature of the Black Sea. This powerful scientific tool transforms the story of the Spondylus trade from a compelling hypothesis into a scientifically verified fact. It allows us to see the invisible, to draw the ghostly, ancient pathways of commerce onto a modern map with the certainty of a GPS tracker. The shells, silent for 7 millennia, are finally telling us the secrets of their epic journey, a story written not in script, but in the language of atomic physics. For 2,000 years, the Spondylus trade network had been the great economic and social engine of Neolithic Europe. It had connected a continent, created the first hierarchies, and defined the very concept of wealth and power through the allure of its crimson gold. But no system, no matter how deeply entrenched, is permanent. Beginning in the late 5th and early 4th millennium BC, a new and revolutionary technology began to spread across the continent, bringing with it a new set of materials, a new aesthetic, and a new language of power. This was the dawn of the Age of Metals. The arrival of copper and later of gold and bronze did not overthrow the Spondylus economy in a violent conflict. It simply rendered it obsolete. The old desire for the sacred shell was slowly but inexorably replaced by a new desire for the magical, shining power of metal, and the continent's first great highway of trade slowly faded into a secondary path. The new technology was metallurgy. It was an invention that likely filtered into Europe from the ancient civilizations of the Near East, a complex, alchemical process of using immense heat to transform greenish rock ore into a pure, gleaming, and almost magical new substance. Copper was everything that the traditional materials of the Neolithic, stone, bone, and shell, were not. It was not chipped or ground into shape. It could be melted down and cast into any form imaginable. It was not brittle. It was malleable and ductile. And most importantly, it was shiny. In a world of dull, organic textures, the bright, reflective, sun-like gleam of polished copper was a stunning and captivating novelty. This new material created a new object of desire. While a Spondylus ornament was beautiful, it was a piece of the natural world, transformed by human skill. A copper axe head or a golden dagger was something else entirely. It was a purely artificial creation, a substance wrested from the earth and reborn through the mysterious and powerful technology of fire. To own such an object was to command a piece of this new, almost supernatural science. The focus of elite desire, the very definition of what constituted a prestige good, began to shift. The sacred, life-giving symbolism of the shell began to seem old-fashioned, replaced by the hard, glittering, and high-tech symbolism of metal. This shift is starkly visible in the archaeological record. In the elite grave of the late Neolithic and early Copper Age, we see a dramatic change in the grave goods. While Spondylus shells are still present, their prominence begins to decline. They are now buried alongside and are often clearly secondary to the new symbols of power. Heavy, impractical, but beautifully polished copper axe heads, elegant copper daggers, and the first, exquisite ornaments of beaten gold. The economy of prestige was undergoing a fundamental paradigm shift. The big man of the Neolithic, whose power was demonstrated by the number of exotic seashells he could command, was being replaced by the warrior chief of the Chalcolithic, whose power was displayed in the glint of his new metal weapons. This shift also had a profound impact on the structure of the ancient trade networks themselves. The Spondylus trade was a linear, one-way street, its value derived from the single, remote source in the Aegean and Black Seas. The new metals, however, had multiple sources scattered across the continent. There were major copper deposits in the Balkans, in the Alps, and in Iberia. Gold was found in the rivers of the Carpathian Basin. This created a new, more complex, and multipolar economic map. The old, dominant, north-south Spondylus highway was now just one of many different trade routes in a new, more complex web of exchange. The control of a river crossing on the Danube was still important, but it was no longer the only game in town. The old centers of power, like Varna, which had built their immense wealth on the control of the Spondylus export market, went into a rapid decline. Their business model, a monopoly on a single luxury good, was broken by the arrival of a new, more desirable product. The economic and political center of gravity in Europe shifted away from the Black Sea coast and towards the new centers of copper and gold production in the Balkans and Central Europe. The age of crimson gold was over. The age of yellow gold and reddish copper had begun, a new era that would culminate in the great, continent-spanning bronze trade of the full Bronze Age. The first great chapter in the story of the European economy had come to a close, not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable shifting of human desire towards a newer, shinier, and more powerful idea of value. Our investigation began with a single crimson-hued shell, a mysterious artifact buried 1,000 miles from its ocean home. We sought to understand how this seemingly simple object could become the driving force behind the first great trade network in European history. Having followed its perilous journey from the depths of the Aegean, through the hands of the world's first specialist divers, and along the great river highways into the heart of a continent, the evidence is now clear. The verdict is that the Spondylus shell was far more than a piece of jewelry. It was the first, universally recognized currency of status and power in Neolithic Europe. The ancient trade in this crimson gold was the primary economic engine that shattered the isolation of the first farmers, created the continent's first long-distance connections, and gave birth to the very concept of social hierarchy. We have established that the demand for this commodity was driven by its unique and powerful symbolic properties. Its exoticism, its vibrant, life-giving color, and its likely connection to concepts of fertility made it the ultimate prestige good in a world without metal. the natural monopoly of its source in the warm waters of the south, and the extreme danger of its harvest by specialist freedivers imbued the object with an immense intrinsic value that justified its epic transcontinental journey. Our investigation has charted the logistical and economic structure of this network. We have proven, through the definitive science of isotope analysis, that these shells traveled from the Aegean and Black Seas deep into Central Europe. We have shown that the trade operated on a down-the-line model, its pathways following the great river systems, with value being added at every step of the chain. And we have seen, in the spectacular treasures of the Varna necropolis, the almost unbelievable heights of wealth and power that could be achieved by controlling the production and distribution of this single commodity. Most critically, we have concluded that this trade was the primary catalyst for social stratification in Old Europe. The archaeological evidence from the Grave is unequivocal. The differential distribution of Spondylus artifacts, with a few individuals being buried with immense hoards while the majority had none, is the first clear material evidence of wealth inequality and the rise of a hereditary elite. The big men who controlled the flow of this crimson gold used it as a political tool, a currency to build alliances, to create social debt, and to forge the first hierarchical power structures in a previously egalitarian world. Therefore, the final conclusion of our investigation is this: the Spondylus trade was the foundational economy of Neolithic Europe. It was the continent's first shared system of value, a network that taught disparate and isolated peoples the language of commerce. It was the engine that created the first specialized professions, the first long-distance supply chains, and the first powerful chieftains. The desire for this one beautiful shell was a force powerful enough to lay the entire social and economic groundwork for the more complex European societies that would follow in the ages of bronze and iron. The age of crimson gold eventually gave way to the age of gleaming metal. The once great Spondylus highways of the Danube slowly transformed into the new arteries of the amber and bronze trades. The sacred shell, for 2,000 years, the ultimate symbol of power and prestige, was replaced by a new generation of luxury goods. But the revolution it had started was irreversible. The story of the Spondylus trade is the story of a beginning, the first chapter in the long and complex history of the European economy. Its legacy is not found in the object itself, but in the powerful and enduring human impulses it revealed and the continental connections it forged for the very first time. The Spondylus network is the definitive proof that the desire for the exotic, the beautiful, and the symbolic is one of the most powerful and creative forces in human history. The entire, immense enterprise was built not on a practical need, but on a shared idea of value, a collective agreement that a shell from a distant sea was a worthy symbol of power and status. This trade in useless things was the very thing that proved most useful. It was the engine that shattered the dangerous isolation of the Neolithic world. It created a reason for distant and different peoples to interact, to exchange, and to build relationships based on something other than conflict. It is a powerful reminder that the connections that bind civilizations together are often forged not by the trade in necessities, but by the shared pursuit of beauty. This story also provides the foundational blueprint for every European luxury trade that followed. The patterns established by the Spondylus network, a rare and exotic resource from a distant periphery, traded along river highways to a wealthy core, its control creating powerful elite middlemen, is a story that repeats itself again and again. The Amber Road of the Bronze Age was a direct successor, its geography and its social impact echoing the Spondylus trade. The Silk Road's relationship with Rome, the spice trade's connection to Venice, all of these great chapters in the history of ancient trade are built upon the same fundamental human psychology that first turned a thorny oyster shell into the most desirable object on a continent. Finally, the story of the Crimson Gold is a story about ourselves. It reveals that the fundamental drivers of our own modern economy, the desire for status goods, the creation of value through branding and exoticism, and the formation of social hierarchies based on the control of wealth, are not modern inventions. They are ancient instincts, born in the forests and fields of Neolithic Europe. The world of the big man of the linear pottery culture, who displayed his power with a belt of seashells, is not so far removed from our own world of luxury brands and status symbols. The human need to define ourselves and our position in society through the objects we possess is a story that began here. Thus, the beautiful crimson-hued shell, now a quiet artifact in a museum case, is more than just the remnant of a lost trade. It is a testament to the birth of an idea, the idea of a connected Europe. It is the echo of the first jewel, the first currency, and the first network that began the long, slow process of weaving 1,000 isolated tribes into the fabric of a continent.